This is the moment that Michael Leach was arrested. The two girls behind him, aged 7 and 9, have been locked in his bedroom for 5 days. Leach came to Cambodia over 5 years ago to work as a doctor in an orphanage run by an NGO. But Michael Leach isn't a doctor, and he never has been. Seen here in a shop buying children's underwear, Leach had no intention of ever helping children. Instead, he used his position and his power to sexually abuse them.
Sexual exploitation and abuse by our own staff is an abhorrent crime. It will not be tolerated. I call on each and every one of you, whether you work for the United Nations or for any organization in a development, humanitarian, or peacekeeping context, to carry out your work with honor, pride, and integrity. The trust people place in us must never be broken by despicable acts of sexual exploitation and abuse. The United Nations and all non-governmental organizations worldwide have zero tolerance for such behavior. It is our collective responsibility to uphold the highest standards and protect all those we serve.
It's 8 a.m. in Cambodia's capital city, Phnom Penh. Already the streets are filled with activity as residents and tourists prepare for another day in this vibrant capital city. The man on this motorbike looks just the same as everyone else. He isn't. The street where he is standing is home to a suspected paedophile who, until recently, was employed by an NGO working with children. The man on the motorbike is an undercover investigator employed to watch him.
There are two investigators at the moment here. One is staying right in front of his entrance to the guest house, and the other one is over there to see if he might be coming with children through other entrance.
Sailor Samliang is the director of Action pour les Enfants, or APPLE for short. APPLE works closely with the Cambodian National Police to protect vulnerable children from becoming victims of sexual abuse. Since it began in 2000, APPLE has investigated a total of 43 cases related to NGO workers sexually abusing children.
Generally, people would not suspect someone working with the NGO when they are going out with children, hanging out with children, talking to children, touching children, because the general public would have the first impression that this is just part of their work. And we know that these people are using this NGO background, this NGO work, to carry themselves up from being detected by the authority. And the investigator can prove that easily when they do this sort of day-to-day investigation on the suspect.
The current suspect under investigation was recently dismissed from an orphanage where he worked for inappropriate behaviour towards the children living there. Those children may now be safe. These others may not. Recently, he has been seen taking numerous photos of street children. The concern now is what he intends to use them for.
We suspect that he is trying to set up a facility where he can take care of children. And we also suspect that he is now grooming this street kid. At least he's staying with 2 boys in his home. We suspect that he has been sexually abusing these 2 boys. So if he can move on with resources to set up this facility, we are concerned that a larger number of children, maybe hundreds of children, will be collected by this man, and these children will be put into a dangerous position.
We cannot understate the effect that abusive behaviour can have on a child. And how much worse is it when that person is there to help them, and because they're from an agency like ours, it's so much more difficult to complain about that because nobody believes them. Nobody would believe a word of a child that somebody from an agency like Save the Children has done something to harm them.
But no matter what organisation they work for, when acts of sexual exploitation and abuse are carried out by anyone working in the humanitarian world, the effects are felt by everyone.
If any one of us abuse the position of trust that is given to us in a humanitarian situation, the whole operation is jeopardised. Not only do the reputations of the agencies suffer, but the people in those communities lose confidence in the system.
I thought Dave was good because he brought food and bread to my village. I thought he was a good person. I didn't guess that he was actually a very bad man who could do these things to me.
Glory was just 15 when she was lured into the bedroom of David Fletcher and brutally raped. She met him at a rubbish dump near to her house, where he came regularly to distribute food to impoverished families. The slogan of his organisation, "Help us, help them."
When we went to his house, he cooked for me, but then he took me to his bedroom and locked the door. He turned the TV on real loud. I felt so scared. I shouted for help, but no one came to help because nobody could hear me.
Glory was brave enough to report the attack, and David Fletcher is currently serving a 10-year prison sentence in Bangkok. But had anyone done a basic check on David Fletcher beforehand, they would have seen that he had been convicted of rape in the UK, and perhaps Glory's painful ordeal could have been avoided.
In the past, we have had cases where somebody who is totally unsuitable to work with children, somebody who has shown that they have abused children in the most terrible way, have tried to gain access to children via our agencies. We have to stop this. We have to be aware. We have to have high standards around recruitment and onboarding and training and monitoring.
When you're faced with BBC reporters asking you pretty direct questions about behavior of UN staff and what's going on in the country where you're serving, you'd really like to be able to say, categorically, there's absolutely no bad behavior of any UN staff. And that, unfortunately, isn't always the case.
He buys girls for other men and put them in apartments. Soldiers pay money to own girls for themselves.
Check it out, $3 grand, all mine. Yeah, Luke got one for $2,500.
In 2008, the film The Whistleblower was released to global acclaim. Based on a true story, it gave a disturbing account of how the demand for sex workers by UN peacekeepers in the Balkans during the 1990s was responsible for fueling the trade in trafficked women from neighbouring countries with devastating consequences.
This man drove you in a van across the border into Bosnia.
Yes. We stop at border. I see men in blue like you. I thank God. I think we have our savior. Then he jumps in and drives the van.
Madeline, they're bringing them in. IPTF are actually trafficking girls and bringing them across the border.
Vanessa Redgrave plays the part of Madeleine Rees, who was the head of office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the Balkans at the time.
This involves all kinds of internationals from military officers.
She believes that the realities of what went on as portrayed in the film were just the tip of the iceberg.
Get this up to Peter as quickly as you can.
Sadly, I don't think there's anybody who could put their hands up in Bosnia and say, none of our people were involved. I think it'd be extraordinarily difficult for anyone to say that.
This has represented a public disgrace of all that we have been trying to do in the UN system in bringing help and assistance to bear communities and societies that are emerging or still within the throes of ravaging conflict.
Some people think they are helping women when they buy prostituted sex. They're not. Buying sex harms individual women and children and encourages criminal activity. When children enter the sex industry, they become trapped in a dangerous world from which it is almost impossible to escape.
When I arrived, I saw people on the street with guns, military people. I asked myself, where are we?
Amal was 16 when she boarded a plane from her home in Morocco. She thought she was heading to Europe to work as a waitress. Instead, she was trafficked to Liberia, where she was forced to work as a prostitute.
After 1 week at Sugar Club, I was no more a virgin. I have lost my virginity. My country is Arabic, Muslim. For me, this is a big problem.
At the time, Amal thought that the only people who could save her were the UN. She described her relief when she saw a UN car pull up outside the club. But the driver wasn't coming to save her. Instead, Amal told us that he raped her and then reported to the brothel owner that she was trying to escape.
It's vital that no one, United Nations personnel or other humanitarian workers, it's very important that they do not buy prostituted sex because it's dangerous. It's dangerous, first of all, because it attracts criminals. It attracts criminals because they see that this is an environment where they can make money. It attracts them because they see a market. This fuels the trade and trafficking of women and children, and we must not be a magnet.
If you do it, you are committing a crime which under some circumstances reaches just cogents under international law. You are up there with those who've been indicted by ICTY and ICC for crimes against humanity and war crimes. You're right up there with them. And if that is the case, then you should be sitting in prisons for the same length of time as they are.
Survival sex is one in which women have no choice, where they believe that the only way that they're going to make any money, where they'll be able to keep their job or get a job, is through engaging in sex or in relationships with individuals. It is by no means a relationship of equals.
Mikael is 3 months old. His father is a UN worker who used to give his mother biscuits in exchange for sex. When she became pregnant, he left and has not been heard from since.
Papa de Michael, qu'est-ce qu'il a fait? Lui aussi,
the father of Michael used his financial power. He said, "You become my friend, you pay me a visit." Every time she came, he would give her a little something, some food, nothing significant, just enough to live on for one day.
Mikael's mother survives on less than $1 a day by selling bananas. Now this money must stretch to feed and clothe Mikael as well. But growing up in poverty will not be his only problem.
When Congolese children see that their skin color is different, they will call them names. They will say things like Muzungu Tali Tali, which means you are not white and you are not black either.
There are other consequences for victims besides possible discrimination, including the very real threat of HIV. But it is the robbing of a person's humanity that is perhaps the greatest harm of all.
The eyes and the hearts of those people in the countries where we operate, they do look to us, you know. They see the United Nations as their reason for hope for a better future. And this is why it is catastrophic, you know, if the single misconduct of one or a few just destroys this. It destroys hope, and that, I think, is simply unacceptable.
It is a crime, a totally unacceptable crime, in relation to which we must have zero tolerance, that any humanitarian worker profits from this extreme vulnerability and tries to exert any kind of sexual exploitation or abuse.
UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, was established in 1950 following the 1948 Arab-Israeli conflict. 63 years later, UNRWA is no longer only responding to a humanitarian emergency and now provides more long-term care and support to Palestinian refugees. Many of the men and women gathered here in the West Bank city of Bethlehem are the third or fourth generation of refugees dependent on UNRWA food aid. Given that they are not in the same immediate or desperate need as they once were, the very idea of survival sex in this context is unheard of.
The trust between UNRWA and its beneficiaries has developed over 60 years, and so an incident of sexual abuse would destroy everything we've built up for so long. It just wouldn't happen here.
But sexual exploitation and abuse does not only occur in situations of dire and desperate need. Instead, it manifests itself in many different ways. Unfortunately, it is as problematic here as it is everywhere else. The issue is that nobody wants to talk about it.
We have had a steady stream of about 10 cases officially reported, agency-wide, per year, and a concern that the actual number may be significantly higher due to the extreme sensitivity of reporting and survivors coming forward.
Even the suspicion of an extramarital affair by a woman in this society risks bringing shame and dishonour to the family, the result of which can be punishable by death.
If I told my family or friends of what happened to me, they might be sympathetic to begin with, but after that they will tell me that it is my responsibility and I must defend myself.
In 2008, Maria Mohammedi was asked to follow up on allegations made by an UNRWA beneficiary that a senior camp services officer, or CSO, had raped her in the storeroom behind his office.
We found something pretty dirty, a very small place where you could tell what was happening there. We found a mattress, very old mattress, very dirty mattress, because a lot was going on this mattress. So this was our main piece of evidence, where you could tell that something was happening on that mattress.
Fear of retribution might naturally prevent people from carrying out acts of sexual exploitation and abuse in this society. This case was the very opposite. So confident was the abuser that nobody would dare to report on what he was doing. He would go so far as to ask his colleague, who subsequently came forward as a witness, to pass him the keys to his storeroom and then leave when women came to visit.
It's a classical example of somebody who abuses his power, a systematic abuse of a beneficiary who was in a position of weakness. And the perpetrator felt, in that case, so absurdly confident about his power. I mean, his power was such in this camp that nobody would have done anything to challenge it. And indeed, nobody did anything to challenge it for over 20 years.
The effect that this kind of misconduct has on an organisation is catastrophic.
it has a reputational effect on the agency. It brings damage to the agency through publicity, and also because somehow it breaches the trust between our staff, UNRWA's management, and the Palestine refugees that we have been serving and that we continue to serve for so many years.
This is an area where we can have no contemplation. This is an area where no one can remain in an organization like ours after having committed any these kind of actions that are totally in contradiction with our protection mandate.
Just 2 months after the initial report, the perpetrator was summarily dismissed from office, losing all the entitlements he acquired following his long career with the agency.
If people are found to be responsible, then there must be no culture of impunity. People have to face the consequences of their behaviour.
But it was the fear of reporting that led to this UN worker systematically abusing women with complete impunity for nearly 25 years.
In some cultures, it's more difficult for a woman to disclose that she has been exploited. So in those cases also, we have to be even more vigilant. We have to be also extra careful with our staff, with our NGO partners, and also in general to make sure that we are on the lookout, if you like, to make sure that there is no cases of exploitation taking place.
One should not hesitate to report such instances. It can make the difference between justice being done or it being denied.
Incidents of sexual exploitation and abuse often go unreported for fear of bringing a bad name to the organisation. In the case of Michael Leach, when an allegation was made against him in court, the NGO director he worked for went so far as to write to the judge claiming the children were confused. Such was her fear that his dismissal could prevent further funding. He was subsequently released and 5 years later found these 3 girls, locked them in his room for 5 days and systematically raped them daily until they were discovered.
I have seen the damage that is caused by people failing to report a concern, and the abuse and the exploitation has continued. So if there is anyone out there who has a concern, please bear that in mind of the consequences of your failure to live up to our values, to live up to our commitments of doing no harm and serving with pride.
Reporting acts of sexual exploitation and abuse by UN, NGO and IOM staff is essential. But for incidents to stop, it is the communities they work for that need to be aware of how they too can make complaints if they need to.
So this is a kind of the the box, and so who can report and what kind of report that they can do and how long does it take, and to respond to the community when there is any kind of abuse by our staff.
Life with Dignity is an NGO based in Cambodia that supports rural livelihood practices in impoverished communities across the country. Today, staff from the organisation have invited members of this village to come and learn about staff codes of conduct and community-based reporting mechanisms.
Yeah, you can see, he tried to introduce this drawing, the representing of the LWD staff, who are staying in the field. When they are staying in the field, you can see, all the code they have to comply with.
Following the presentation, the community members are asked to split into groups to discuss what they have learned.
Now I know how LWD staff members have to behave. I will know what to do if something goes wrong. If I have to make complaints, then I will use the box. This is the only way for our community to develop.
Reassuring communities that complaints will be dealt with quickly and confidentially goes a long way towards breaking down any fears people have of reporting. In Cambodia, it's essential.
Many of us here lived through the Pol Pot regime. Then, if you spoke up about things, you risked severe punishment or even death. So people have learned to remain silent. It's good to know that we can speak up now if we need to.
Overcoming people's fear of reporting is stage one, but success will only come from the effective handling of any complaints that are subsequently made.
In our experience, people in communities, children, lose confidence very quickly if, having raised an issue with us, they find that no action is taken or that there's no resolution or satisfaction from their point of view. So if we are going to invest in feedback and response or complaint handling systems, we have to make sure that there are visible consequences if people are to have any level of confidence in those processes.
But maintaining the good behaviour of staff members and making beneficiaries aware of the available channels to report misconduct if it occurs will only prove successful with strong leadership from senior managers.
We have to recognize that such instances can happen, and the best way to deal with that is to make sure that when such instances do happen, that they come to the attention of senior management and they are dealt with swiftly and fairly.
The standard that UN portrays or is seen by others should be very high, because this is the standard by which the world is measured. If the standard comes down, then it means the world is rotten.
Every day, vulnerable women and children count on the UN. They count on us for help and protection. Working to provide them is more than a mandate. It's more than a mission statement. It's a responsibility we take to heart. Every employee, every contractor, every partner.
The world entrusts the United Nations and all of our partner organizations with a noble mission to help those in need. Do not betray it. Let us rise to the occasion. Let us work with dignity, and let us serve with pride.
It's entirely possible that the caseworker could tell the refugee, I can speed up your case, I can slow down your case, I can make sure you were refused, I can make sure you were accepted if you do the following for me, which of course would be completely illegitimate. In order to benefit one staff member, they would be devastating, catastrophically, a program that fundamentally is doing good. And it would make me angry. It would make me want to take out my anger on that person because it's so unfair. We're trying to do so much for so many people that for one person to shut it all down is just repugnant.
Where there is any indication that staff members have reason to believe that there has been this kind of unacceptable behavior, they must report it, because if they don't, then they are just contributing to the impunity of the offenders.
There needs to be some response. It needs to be very clear to the individual and to the beneficiaries, to the rest of the organization, to the host government, this is not acceptable. And so action needs to be taken.
We have to promote a culture which makes it absolutely clear that this kind of behavior is totally unacceptable.
Okay, the senior managers have a responsibility to put in place mechanisms which are conducive to respect to our beneficiaries. WFP, by distributing food, cooperate with lots of implementing partners, NGOs, and government. When this kind of situation occurs, it puts it creates a security risk for all the stakeholders working in the area.